Welcome everybody to the Boswell Book Company, Lilliput Records joint first ever, but maybe not last joint virtual event. I'm Daniel Golden from Boswell, and I'm going to give a short introduction. It is day 4,989 of Boswell being in business. I'd like to introduce Tanner Musgrove from Lilliput Records. They are a co-sponsor very dear to my heart because as I mentioned, 4,989 days ago, Boswell opened, and we were part of a local operation called Harry W. Schwartz Bookshops. And we went it alone and sort of built up our business from there. And Tanner and her partner are doing the same with Lilliput, which was once a branch of this exclusive company. I bring you Tanner.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for the introduction and thanks for having us on. So yeah, I'm co-owner Tanner, and Lilliput Records is a locally owned independent record store. Our main focus is new vinyl and CDs. So we have hundreds of catalog titles along with weekly new releases that come out every Friday. And then we also dabble in pre-owned vinyl and CDs as well, with a goal of just being more of a community-based space. We kind of are, doing what the exclusive company did, but with a little bit of a twist, and just trying to make it more of a local scene. But tonight we are joined by the beloved music critic and Stereo Gum senior editor, Tom Breihan. Tom is the author of The Number Ones, a fascinating narrative of the history of popular music through the lens of game-changing number one singles from the Billboard Hot 100. He's written for Pitchfork, The Village Voice, the AV Club, GQ, and The Ringer, among others. I've personally really enjoyed reading the number ones, so I'm very excited to sit in on this conversation. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, is this the part where I introduce? Okay, cool. All right, so I am the senior editor at Stereo Gum. I've been working there for more than 10 years now, and for the last 4 years, I guess, I've been writing this column called The Number Ones, where I am reviewing every number one song in the history of the Billboard Hot 100, which goes back 64 years to 1958. And there's been more than 1,000 of them. I think I'm around 900. I'm in the early 2000s on the column. And a while ago, someone came to me with the idea of turning the column into a book. My book is out now. It's kind of an extension of the column, and the idea is that I picked 20 songs that were number one hits. They're all going back to the early days of the charts. I think they all either signal or encapsulate or sometimes cause some sort of like shift in the way pop music has evolved, in the way it's received, and some of those songs are sort of obvious no-duh picks. Some of them I think are maybe a little bit less canonical, but I think are just as important and just as kind of interesting to get into. And in writing about all these songs, I've kind of gotten really into the idea that all these songs have really fascinating stories, and that they all kind of interact with the world around them in interesting ways. And I hope that the songs I've picked in the book are able to kind of illustrate the way some of those changes have happened. And I hope that I've written about them in a way that's like fun and informative and entertaining. That was the goal. So thank you so much for it. It feels crazy to have a book out. It is my first book. I did not think of myself as a book type of writer, but the response that at least that I've gotten so far has been extremely nice, and I'm really happy to be here to talk about it.
Well, I love the book so much. I mean, I've been following the column since I think you were in the 1960s, and because it was when you first started, it was still 5 days a week, and they were much shorter essays. And I remember the day you announced that you were going to 3 days a week, and I was like, I almost had started crying. I'm like, what am I going to do in the morning? And then you kind of did this amazing thing that you took the column to another level when you went to 3. And I was like, how did one extra day do this? So, and the thing that's amazing, there's 2 things I really need to say about this book. One is that if you read the column every day, this is completely different material. I mean, it's just like you wrote a fully, once again, took those essays to another level. And then the second thing I want to say is, like, even if you don't listen to music obsessively, and I don't, and I did, it is such a deep dive into culture. That's what I love so much about it. Is like you know, like it is like almost like the hidden history of every song. You find these amazing through lines, and so like I read about lots of things that I don't know much about, and I want to convince everybody that this is something that if you don't know much about music, it's just as interesting, and sometimes even more interesting, because you're not going, no, I think you're wrong, whatever, the way that music people do.
Of course, we all do it. Thank you so much. That's so nice.
So let's start at the beginning. Like what? So you were convinced to do this, and you said, what was the first song that you said, well, there's no way I'm not going to include this song?
I mean, honestly, the first one that probably popped into my head was Ice Ice Baby, because that's the first rap song that went to #1, which is it's a sad thing to think about. It doesn't say anything good about American culture. Rap music existed on the pop charts for more than 10 years before Vanilla Ice came along and took his goofy fun song that I still remember all the words to the top of the charts. And all sorts of circumstantial things had to happen there, changes with the way the charts were put together, and decisions made by record labels, but it somehow ends up with this guy with the pompadour being the first rapper to ascend to the top of the American charts. And there are, Billy. I have a chapter on Billie Jean in the book. I have a chapter on I Want to Hold Your Hand. I have a chapter on Baby One More Time. These songs that are big kind of cultural lodestars that if you know anything about pop music, you know these songs. And I love those songs, and I love thinking about them. I love sort of teasing out the threads. But something like Ice Ice Baby, which is its own kind of cultural lodestar, is just as interesting, if not more so, to me, because it's like, why this song and why this guy at this time? Like, what was it that had to happen? What sort of whatever chemical reactions in the air were the ones that took Vanilla Ice or George McRae or Soulja Boy? Like, what made them so important in their moment, even if they're not whatever first ballot rock and roll Hall of Famers?
Yeah. What I mean, do you feel like that Vanilla Ice song has had any sort of redemption arc? I mean, I think about ABBA, for example, which was somewhat vilified in their day, certainly not taken seriously, or one more dramatic, which is not in the book, but your Sugar Sugar story, the Archies, where people were like, radio stations wouldn't even play them. They were so horrified by this idea. And then, now it is considered a classic of pop music by critics.
It is, and I don't think Ice Ice Baby is considered a classic of pop music or rap music or anything else by most critics. But I do think that nostalgia has a certain leavening effect on some of this stuff. So in the time, in his moment, Vanilla Ice was a crisis for rap music. Like, he was a problem. He was a harbinger of bad things to come. And those things, for the most part, didn't really come. Like, more popular white rappers did emerge eventually, but he wasn't like rap's Elvis. Rap hasn't had an Elvis.
Right.
Even Eminem wasn't rap's Elvis.
And I guess you sort of feel like maybe he might have helped rap move in the more authentic direction.
Well, yeah, I think the backlash to Vanilla Ice was ultimately as more powerful than what Vanilla Ice was able to accomplish on his own, which is sad on some level. But it's like, I think when something comes along that gets super popular and then there's a huge backlash against it, that kind of creates its own wave and its own narrative. And with Vanilla Ice, it's really interesting because the person who did not actually dangle him over a balcony to get the publishing for Ice Ice Baby, but there's a big cultural myth that he did. That guy was Suge Knight, who was the co-founder of Death Row Records, which had its own gigantic effect. So it's like the guy and the guy who was the backlash to, who kind of encapsulated the backlash to the guy, that they're both huge fundamental driving forces in popular culture in different ways, and they still had this like fateful encounter on this balcony in Los Angeles.
It's crazy. I like the we're not going to spend an hour talking about Vanilla Ice because I'll just cry myself to sleep, but I would like to note the true redemption arc of any sort of artist is fame, backlash, obscurity, and then a home renovation show.
Of course, yeah. With Vanilla, I mean, culture is funny now because there's like a whole right now. If you've ever been famous and you have ever been considered humiliating, then you can find work kind of making fun of yourself. And I think Vanilla Ice has done that to some extent. He's done the David Hasselhoff arc, where he can show up in a movie as a cameo as himself, and everybody's like, Vanilla Ice. I think,
Cheap laugh.
Yeah, it's a living. There's worse things.
What do you think was so aside from Vanilla Ice, what do you think was another either controversial or unexpected pick for the book?
I think the one that might be most unfamiliar to people was Rock Your Baby by George McRae, which I have in the book because it is I have decided it's kind of... There's
a little controversy there.
Is there controversy? I don't know.
No, I mean, not that I'm taking polls or anything, but you decided, go ahead, finish the sentence.
Well, yeah, so the sort of advent of disco as a force in popular music, there's not like a light switch moment. There's no like one song that sums it all up. Because disco was a gradual creep thing. Like it was an underground phenomenon that became hugely mainstream in a relatively short amount of time. But for the most part, like the early disco DJs who were breaking these songs, they weren't playing disco songs in clubs because disco music wasn't a thing that existed yet. They were taking R&B records that were up-tempo that sounded good in this environment and playing them. And some of those records became huge hits. The reason I wrote about Rock Your Baby is that from what I can tell, it was the first time somebody was like, you know what, let's actually make a record for the clubs. And that record became this huge #1 hit. It doesn't sound that much like a disco record. Like it doesn't sound like Staying Alive. It sounds more like a sort of a fast, rickety Al Green song. And that's kind of the part of the charm to me. And the fact that it's written to a drum machine. It's one of the first #1 hits that uses a really primitive drum machine. And the two guys who wrote the song were the main driving forces of what was already becoming Casey and the Sunshine Band, who went on to have a whole bunch of #1s of their own, and to become like, to the extent that you could be a disco star, they were disco stars. But this is when they were kids and they were starting out, and they were like functionaries at a small record label in Florida. And George McRae, the guy who sang the song, was literally just in the room at the time. They were thinking about having his wife sing the song, and he was there, I think, to pick her up. I can't remember exactly what the story was off the top of my head, but like he was basically like in the room at the time, and they were like, "Here, sing this song," and he knocked it out of the park. Got a #1 hit. Never got super famous. Got screwed out of tons of money by his record label ogre guy. But I think he goes down as this like pivotal figure in a weird way because he was the guy at the time. Like he was the guy with the disco song at the time that disco was becoming a thing.
Well, if there's a through line through your book, it's that a lot of artists get screwed out of their...
A lot of them get screwed out of their stuff, and a lot of them also happen to be the right people at the right time, even if they're now considered generational geniuses, and even if they deserve to be remembered as generational geniuses, things still had to, the dominoes had to fall in the right way.
Right. And of course, the happy ending for his wife is she had a top 10 hit the next year.
She did, yeah. And then they broke up.
And then they broke up. One of the things I love about you, and you, I mean, I don't know you, but one of the things I love about your writing is that you rate all your top 10s and the top 10s on Billboard. Like, you only will give a rating if it went to top 10. And our way, I was a charter. I don't know if you must have come across tons of people who did this, like where I would make up my own top.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And I had all these people that I corresponded with all over the country. I got all these people in high school and college and work to make up charts, and we were sending charts all over the place. But the thing that was nice about it is I could basically say what I liked about anything. You've got this, like, if it hit 11, I can't tell you. But yet, from all the research you did, that it was probably payola that got a song to 10 over 11. Like, there was about, the Billboard chart guy took money. Everyone knows that. You talked about it. So it's a little arbitrary. So what made you come up with that formula?
I don't know. It was like, that was like an idea that I had. Like, let me start. If I mention a song in passing in a column and it was a top 10 hit that wasn't a number one, because in the column I give every song a rating from 1 to 10,
right.
And then I eventually decided I was going to start doing that with any song that I mentioned in the column that was a top 10 hit. But if it wasn't a top 10 hit, then it didn't have a legit shot at getting to number one, so it doesn't get a rating. That was this like weird arbitrary thing that I came up with a couple of years ago, and I've stuck with it. It's the column is evolved. When I first started writing it, it was just a couple paragraphs, and now I write these giant thousands of word screeds about whatever. And I don't know why I've decided to start doing that. I think it's just that I've found all the stories about these songs to be so interesting that I kind of can't like hold back and filter the information anymore. I just have to get it all out there.
Yeah.
But it's, so anytime I'm talking about a number one song, there's a bunch of other songs that were just hovering outside the circle and didn't quite make it in. And I guess I decided that if it's a top 10 hit, then it could have been number one. If the winds had blown a little differently that day, it could have gone all the way.
Actually, if you look at like Cashbox and Record World, there were songs that were hitting 4 and 5 on Billboard that would go to 1, and some you go, but other ones, if something was at 3 for 8 weeks, or something like that, it feels like it had a legitimate shot. A song hitting 10 in 1 week, probably less so, but I think that's fair. I love it. Obviously, your readers love it. They obsess over where you're going to rank things. Have people talked to you about your number one? It's not a bonus, but you give a little extra negative weight to a song that hit number one, such that you often find the songs that peaked lower in the top 10 ranking a little higher than the number one song.
I don't know. It's so, because it's all arbitrary, and it's all like in my head. It's all like so I don't know. Maybe I feel like if a song gets to number one, it has to be better. Maybe it's some subconscious thing.
You rate it harder. Yeah.
Yeah, I try not to overthink the rankings and the ratings too much. I try to do them on feel, like it like this feels right. Like I wrote earlier this week, the last one that went up was Yeah by Usher. And I was convinced it was going to be a 9. And then when I was writing about it, I was like, no, gotta be a 10. Gotta put it all the way up. I don't know what clicked in my head where it became a 10 instead of a 9. It doesn't, there's no scientific reason for it. It's just, it was just like, nope, gotta be a 10, gotta do it.
Well, I'm happy for Usher and Ludacris and Lil Jon, and I'm sure that when they saw it, they were probably like, "Come on!"
I have never met or interacted in any way with Usher, Lil Jon, or Ludacris. I bet I could have a fun conversation with any of the three of them.
I think you would like to.
I
But it
probably.
feels like the only person you ever seemed to talk to was BJ Thomas, and that didn't go very well. So
I've gotten a couple little nice, nice little tweets from people who I've covered in the column.
oh,
Dick Gibson was very nice. Bonnie Tyler was very nice. But I tend to proceed under the idea that none of the people who I've written about are ever going to see this thing, which is probably an increasingly naive way to think about this, especially as I get into like more common things where like most of the people I'm writing about are still alive and active.
now I know why you give rap records such high ratings, because you're afraid if you don't like them, what the repercussions are.
I'm a very big man who lives in a very small town, and I don't think anybody's going to run up on me because I gave their song a 6 instead of a 7. You know, whatever.
Okay, I feel better.
Beat up by Lil Jon, then that's that's a story that I can tell for the rest of my life.
Lil Jon got a 10. What's he got? He's not complaining about it.
He's little. I'm big.
I'm not really sure in a fight is everything, but if it makes you feel comfortable, you go with that. I want to talk about your somewhat hatred of ballads.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So what do you think it is? Because I'm not a huge ballad person myself. I actually like a song that makes me cry a little, but I would prefer it to be up tempo and making me cry.
Mm-hmm.
And like you've shown again and again how these bands or single artists would have lots of hits, and it would always be the ballad to take them to the top. What's your reflection on why that would happen? And do you think that the lessening effect of radio has really helped up-tempo songs against ballads?
I think it definitely has. The way Billboard kind of puts their Hot 100 together has changed a lot over time. It used to be just single sales and radio play. Now there's streaming. There's all kinds of other stuff involved. Radio is still important, but it is less important now. And there's so many cases of like, you think about like the one that comes to mind most often with me is all these like Latin freestyle artists from the 80s who made these great dance singles. The Expose is the one that pops into my mind for whatever reason first. Expose has like bangers on bangers. And then the song that finally gets them to #1 is a really boring ballad called Seasons Change, I think is their one.
Change.
I've written so many of these things. It's so hard to keep them straight. But it's because more radio stations would play them, is I think ultimately what it is. Like the adult contemporary radio stations would play a ballad and they wouldn't play a bleepy dance pop jam, even if the bleepy dance pop jam is, to my mind, like far exponentially better. And I think I am a sort of immature and impatient music fan. Like I like stuff that the stuff that I listen to at home is like punk and rap and like hardcore and like metal. Like I like stuff that is gonna like make me want to run through a wall, and very few ballads will make me do that. I understand. There's plenty of ballads that I love, and I understand that for a lot of people, they go to music more to be soothed than to be like jackhammered in the skull. But that's just how I am. That's whatever fault of my wiring exists. I need to be. I need intensity and viscerality and that like sense of like freewheeling fun that I get out of like a fun, fast, like up-tempo jam.
Well, I do feel like you had a slightly softer spot for a ballad if it was by a hair metal band.
That's true. I do like hair metal ballads.
One of your I mean, there's a lot of songs where I went, yeah, that's okay or whatever, but then listening to reading your column, and I would get completely into a song that I never thought I was before. Expose was a good example. I think I watched the YouTube Come Go With Me 20 times after I read your column. And I don't, so I feel like it's really done a lot for it really broadens your horizons. I felt the same way for when your Bon Jovi column, which I just thought it was, I think your love of Bon Jovi is contagious, because I don't really have much of it, but where is that? I mean, because the thing about your criticism is it's so much into you. It's your life. There's things you're definitely different with the songs before you were born than you are. So did you have an emotional resonance with Bon Jovi growing up?
Absolutely, definitely. So I'm 43 now, right? That means I was in grade school when hair metal was popping, and yeah, I liked all that stuff. My first Guns N' Roses and Metallica and Faith No More was my first show, and that's not quite hair metal. That's like slightly post, but like all that stuff that was on the radio and that was specifically designed to jack you up. I was into it. Yeah, I really like I like Bon Jovi a lot. I think they have these like amazing like platinum plated hooks. All that stuff definitely resonates with me on some deeper level. They were never like my favorite band, but like I think when I was in college, I bought like a used cassette of their greatest hits that I was just in my car constantly, like constantly. And it would be like, 10 years after Bon Jovi, when nobody thought they were cool, I would be like, man, the pre-chorus to Living on a Prayer is better than anybody else's chorus. Like, how did they pull that? It'd be like one of those things where you just like rediscover it.
I have millions and zillions of singles, and I worked at a college radio station, and so I got to take anything that we didn't put in the permanent library, and I have the first Desmond Child and Rouge single.
Wow.
Our Love Is Insane. Before he discovered metal.
Yeah, when he was kind of a disco guy.
It is a disco, it's a complete disco song. I also I really love I don't know, I love wherever you go with songs. I mean, I'm not a big my rap experience, I've never been a big rap person, but when I was in college, I worked in the Macy's Herald Square basement and in the shipping, and it was and they played music, and we had no control of the music, and it was when Rapper's Delight was popular, and like half the shippers knew all the words to it. And so
at the time, like you were done with the job.
Yeah. But yeah, I knew quite a bit. Yes.
It looks like wood.
But it's interesting for me because rapping was definitely when I was living in New York, it felt so much bigger than it did when you would look at the charts. But I think part of that is what you were saying about the expose, is that Billboard had prejudices over what kind of music was pop music, what kind of music wasn't, what kind of radio station would support. So one of the things that people don't realize, that sort of X's out songs, is that for a long time, the song had to specifically be released to pop music stations to chart, not to go to one, to just chart at all. So you would have all these huge like R&B songs. One of the ones I remember, a number one R&B song, is called Funkin' for Jamaica by Tom Brown. Never charted on the top 100 because they never specifically released it. Like, that's impossible. How could a song be number one on R&B and not make any dent in popular music?
It's so weird, and it still happens, even though the way they put everything together is different now, and they use streaming data and all this other stuff.
Right.
You still, like, I spent a lot of today writing about Fantasia Barrino, the American Idol winner, and her number one song, I Believe. And it's like, within the R&B world, Fantasia was a gigantic star, and still is, honestly, for a really, really long time. And it was just after her one big American Idol like crowning song, just never had big pop hits after that. It's the pop charts can be like very weirdly segregated sometimes.
Yeah, it's strange because it's not, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like the charts are doesn't feel like the charts are segregated, and yet there is still that niche. It almost feels like if you're rap, if you're hip hop, you can cross over, but if you're old school R&B, it seems to become much harder. And I can see that, you know, a certain segment of the population is probably not gaming the system quite the way younger people appreciate music in a different way. An older person might still buy a download or a record or something like that. And then you'll never see that in the way that you would if it was just Spotify, where the person gets charts and charts and charts and charts and charts.
Yeah, for sure. It's there's all these it's because there's no way, even with all the algorithms and everything that we have, to properly measure what people actually listen to for fun. Like it hasn't, that doesn't exist. I hope it never will, because it lets this stuff be so much more mysterious and weird and unpredictable. And the mysterious, weird unpredictability is like what I love about the pop charts and like pop music in general.
Are you saying unpredictable? Is there a possibility that Mariah Carey won't hit #1 this year? I saw she just jumped from 25 to 4. It just makes me cry when one thing I really loved when Christmas songs were separated is I just hate that takeover every year. It just, ugh.
You know, All I Want for Christmas Is You is a great song. Like, that's just a fundamentally awesome pop song. And part of the reason why it's going to keep going to #1 for like every year for the rest of our lives is that like nobody's written a better Christmas song since. It's like, it is the last Christmas standard. So it's a little weird now when when there's just this like crushing inevitability of like, oh, it's Mariah's time again this year. But also, you know, if it's gonna be somebody's time every year, like why not Mariah Carey? Like, why
You
not?
do love Mariah. You love Mariah Carey.
I never considered myself a gigantic fan before I started working on the column, but it's like she has more #1s than anybody who is not the Beatles. So to write this column, I've had to get really into the intricacies of Mariah Carey's whole career. And it is a fascinating, crazy, amazing career. Like, she at least co-wrote 18 of her 19 #1 hits. Like, she's not a studio creation. She's not a record label robot. She has this incredible voice, but she also has a sense of what to do with that voice. And yeah, I have come. There was a while when I'd be like looking at, oh, what am I writing about today? Oh, it's another Mariah Carey song. Wow. That would start to be a little self-defining. And she is definitely like tried to game the charts as much as anybody else, but also she's won that game, and she's won it in part by being like incredibly talented and having great songs. So like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I love the through line of, you could almost put all the Mariah Carey columns together and make another book, because it's just the emancipation indeed, of her trying to sing. She obviously wrote those other songs too, and I really love the first album, but it was really fascinating to see her increasing collaborations and moving away from what I call one of your most hated things, which would be schmaltz.
She's good at schmaltz though too. Like,
she's like I said, but
but
and maybe the thing is, Mariah conquered the schmaltz in a way that, for example, you would say that Whitney Houston did not conquer the schmaltz. The schmaltz conquered Whitney Houston.
Yeah, a case could be made for sure.
Yeah, not that you have a lot of Whitney Houston songs that you really like, but she could go deep dive into Clive Davis territory, as we say.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you, one of the a problem to be overcome with the book is that to be a game-changing song, it had to go to #1. So were there any songs that you're like, this is a game-changing song, and it came really close, and I would write a chapter about this if it had only gone to #1?
Yeah, no, I was talking about this with somebody today. There's no Madonna song in the book, and I feel a little bad about that. But it seems to me that Madonna has a ton of number one hits, and most of them are great songs. And some like there could be a chapter on Like a Virgin. It would make sense, but I think the one that would be that sort of begs to be written about the most is Material Girl, and it got to number two, so it's not at number one. Nothing But a G Thing by Dr. Dre. That would absolutely be a chapter if it had gotten past number two. Um, there's a chapter in the book about Where Did Our Love Go by the Supremes, and that was kind of my way in to talk about Motown and also to talk about the Supremes being like the Beatles' greatest rivals and sort of companions in this weird kind of a way over time. But if Shop Around by Smokey Robinson had if that had gotten past that Lawrence Welk song that blocked it, that would have definitely been my like route to talking about Motown, because that was like 4 years before the Supreme song. Like that was out of nowhere that the Smokey Robinson got there.
I'm so glad you're talking about Smokey Robinson, because I just went on. I mean, this book leads, and your column leads me to one deep dive after another. And for the life of me, I have no idea why, but I became very obsessed, just like I did when I was 14 years old, with a Smokey Robinson. His first, I think it was his first solo top 40 hit called "Baby That's Back At Ya," went to 26. It went to one on one of his only two number ones in the R&B chart. And it's the strangest jazz song with a flute, but I love it. He's such a good songwriter. He's such a good songwriter.
Incredible. I don't know that song off the top of my head. I gotta look it up when we're done.
It's such an, you're like, this was a hit, but after, I mean, I can listen to it over and over and over again. So big fan. And it's nice to know that Shop Around that place. I had no idea that I love the detail in your, I don't think it's in the book, but it's in the column about Smokey Robinson and trying to write a song for Kim Carnes, and then just saying, maybe I'll do it myself, because he liked the way she did More Love.
Yeah.
So
cool. I love Smokey Robinson, and I love him as like he has one number one hit that's been in the column, and Tears of a Clown, and that's it. But and he wrote more also, but like I love him as just a recurring character who's like, I mean, he had a 20-year run where he was extremely important to the development of pop music. And
right.
So he's there in the background, even when I'm not writing about him directly.
Because he was an executive too, right? He was working there.
Yeah, he was, and he was right. He wrote "My Girl" for the Temptations. He wrote "My Guy" for Mary
Very
Wells.
well,
And then he like invented "Quiet Storm." Like it like gave it its name.
Oh, "Baby That's Back At Ya" is on the Quiet Storm album, by the way.
Okay, right
on. Hey, one of the things when Billboard went to SoundScan, because one of the things is that people, there really have been very major ways that Billboard has done their charting. And when they went to SoundScan, the big revelation was that rap and country were way more popular than Billboard was charting it.
Yes.
Rap has certainly shown that. But interestingly enough, at least on the tunes chart, country has not. It's still really been a very occasional song that has crossed over to mainstream pop music. They take away the steel guitar, maybe. I think that's the Lone Star column that you had. Why do you so when by crossing over, it meant for these artists having a bunch of songs that peaked in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Why did that promise of country, that country is so much more popular, and then
that is intentional. In country music, the sort of like country's relationship with pop music and with crossover is a fascinating, tortured thing that has changed so many times over the years. So there was a moment in the early 80s, the urban cowboy era, as it's known, where there were a bunch of country songs that became huge crossover hits. Kenny Rogers had a couple, Dolly Parton had a couple, Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton had one. Um, and and within country there was a backlash and a reaction to that. That's when you had all your like neo-traditionalist Randy Travis, Dwight Yoakam types popping up. And in the 90s, when that sound scan thing happened, and when everybody realized how popular country music was, a lot of that was Garth Brooks, who is a transcendent superstar who I will not get to write about in the column, because Garth Brooks made an intentional decision that his songs would not be released as singles. They would not be pushed to pop radio. Even as he beefed his sound up to crazy levels and started wearing the Janet Jackson headset microphone and running around in stadiums and having pyro and all this stuff shooting up, carrying himself as a rock star in so many ways, he wanted to send a cultural signal that, no, I'm a country guy. I'm never abandoning country. And so in this time when you had to have your single released and you had to put it out to pop radio if it was going to chart, he was like, no, I'm not doing that. And so he sold bajillions of albums, dumbfounding numbers of albums. He had like 10 diamond albums, like absurd numbers, like numbers that are baffling today, that are like looking at them as like trying to, like, how fast is the universe expanding? It's like one of those numbers that just doesn't make any sense. But Garth Brooks said no to pop radio. And so the only time Garth Brooks has ever had a top 10 hit was when he decided to become Chris Gaines, his ridiculous and short-lived alter ego. And I think he got to number 4 with the Chris Gaines song, which just sounds like a Garth Brooks song. It doesn't sound like this whatever weird conceptual stuff he was doing. And so yeah, there's like, I've been thinking about writing because this column is going to finish eventually. I'm going to catch up to the present day and what I'm going to write about when it's done. And I might write about diamond albums, like albums that sold at least 10 million copies. And if I do that, then Garth Brooks is going to be that column's Mariah Carey. He's going to be the guy who just shows up again and again and again. Like how popular he was is something that the Hot 100 simply can't reckon with. It is outside of its purview.
But of course, Garth couldn't have made that decision now to not release his songs.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
now there is no Garth Brooks figure because the charts are everything. They have subsumed all.
Similarly, oh my God, the 90s just drive me crazy when they stopped releasing singles, like the No Doubt and Love Fool, and I'm just like, I think it's actually what sort of was one of the things that led to my downfall of losing interest in music. I'm like, unfortunately, I recently upgraded my Billboard book of top 40 hits from 1995 to 2009. And that one actually, if a song didn't get released as a single, it tells you how it did in airplay.
Okay, yeah.
And it actually let me make peace with that period.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It doesn't actually matter. Like, these songs still exist. They're still super popular. The artists who made them are all rich as hell. But like, some itchy part of your brain is just like, no, this doesn't make sense. This is wrong. Starts flashing lights at you, and that's just how it is. It's the data is all corrupted, and that's just how it's going to be.
We want things to be rational that aren't necessarily like that, where it's out of our control. I mean, I will tell you, I was screaming with anger when everybody was doing the Taylor Swift, first artist to have 10 songs in the top 10, and I was sort of like, you couldn't do it. There's a reason why it didn't happen. It wasn't allowed to happen.
Right. So it's the steroid era, it's things are just operating on a completely different math now. But at the same time, what they're saying when they say that Taylor Swift has like broken all these chart records is that Taylor Swift is crazy popular. She is wildly successful right now, which is true. She is. And she is at a level of cultural omnipresence that happens very rarely in pop music. Like, she is a a generational star, and the ways of measuring that have changed. But at the same time, like I think it's cool that her #1 hits now are part of the official record, and they're in conversation with every other #1 hit from everyone else ever. And she is such a singular figure. Her career looks like nobody else's. That it's cool to kind of see her pulling off these things that weren't possible 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Fair enough. And also she broke Ticketmaster. So
it needed to get broken. She might have done us all a favor.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions or comments. It is a good. Well, Sally Lepore wants to know, is Lilliput going to carry this book? That's for Tanner.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. We could.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
fair
we,
enough.
we haven't really dabbled in books a whole ton. I'd like to start bringing that in more, but I know a great bookstore that will be carrying it.
True enough, but we give you permission to share.
Okay, there we
Share
go.
the wealth. Richard Tarazi has said, oh, I already asked this question, but I want to ask it again. Wait, read it. Really enjoyed the book, read in a day, and have been posting, recommending my friends and family. Good, shout out. And then Sally also wants to know, have you been doing a lot of radio shows? Because you also have an excellent radio voice.
That's so nice. I have the worst cold right now. I'm like eating cough drops as we speak. I hope that's not. No, I've done like a couple podcasts and stuff. I had a college radio show that nobody listened to. But thank you. I think it's a function of being extremely tall. No radio plans.
Christopher Terry says he loves how you combine analysis and emotional reaction. Can you tell us about striking the balance between the personal and statistical?
I wish that I could. It's an instinctive thing, I guess. I try to write for I guess I try to write conversationally. So if a column doesn't sound like somebody yammering at you in a bar, then I don't want it, then I've messed it up somehow. If I get there's a lot of information that has to be conveyed, and there's a lot of numbers in the column because it's a column about numbers. But I don't want it to just read as something dry and whatever academic. That is not a way that respect to academics. My parents were both academics. That's not the way I want to write. So if I try to get the information across while still making it personal, and I'm a critic and I don't believe in objective criticism existing. I think it's all kind of based on gut, and that's how I try to write it.
I hear. But it is true, though. It also, you might be doing it to sort of deflect I'm an academic critic, but really the personal stuff just makes it so much more enjoyable. It's just like, it's like a memoir in music to me.
Yeah, it's very conversational, which I really gravitated towards. And I just found myself not wanting to put it down because of that. So
that and the glue that we put on the
that's
cover.
so nice.
yes.
Yeah. Suzanne, our friend Suzanne, wants to know how different are the #1s in Great Britain, especially in the early rock days. Early rock days, Suzanne, they're different right now. But you should also talk about the inspiration for the book from that.
Yeah, I haven't mentioned it yet, and I've been trying to give props whenever I get a chance. So great opportunity. My column, the #1s, is a bald-faced ripoff of a column that is being written still by a British guy named Tom Ewing. He started many years ago. Started a blog on his website, Freaky Trigger. Started a blog called Popular, where he is reviewing every British #1. And I had the idea to start writing the #1s. After an afternoon kind of binging his column and wondering if anyone could do the same thing for the American charts. The British charts and the American charts have been very different at various different points. And they've been different in some weird, confusing ways. There's a lot of times where they're super similar. I think right now they're very often similar, but there have been different points in history when the UK got the singing shows before we did. Like American Idol is an adaptation of a British show, and they had a bunch of those shows in the UK, and they completely confounded the pop charts. They that so many bad ballads from so many like reality show winners that it was like a wave of locusts that swept through the British charts. But also because the UK is such a small country, things can catch on in this like buzzy, fun, fatty way where like and these cultural waves that just never happened in America, like rave music in the late 80s, that took over the British charts in an awesome way. And the UK also has like a really healthy chart culture. I think people have been interested in British charts for much longer than they've been interested in American charts, partly because of the TV show Top of the Pops, and also partly just because the way their kind of media environment works over there. My family lived in the UK for a year in London when I was 8 and 9 years old, which was 1988 to 1989, which was, that's where I had my like pop music awakening. And that British like chart pop then was like Soul to Soul and like Weird Acid House. And that shit is so good. And I loved it so much. And I didn't know that that wasn't pop music here, that like you couldn't just have like a beat for 5 minutes with like countdown is commencing or whatever. Like it like it definitely shaped the way I listen to things. It's the way they do things over there. So it's super different, except when it's not, is I guess the answer.
There's some sort of different methodology because there's tons more turn too on their charts.
Mm-hmm.
I think they
do it
still
by sales alone.
Hmm?
They do it. I think they use streaming now, but for the longest time it was sales alone. Well, over here it's sales and radio play.
Yeah, they also, I feel like they might have some, well, maybe that's amounts to the recurrent thing that things just disappear much faster there, and much more the way things sort of used to be, where they would knock songs off. It just feels like when you look at charts now, as opposed to 20, 30, 40 years ago, it feels like we listen to a lot less stuff. It almost feels like people talk about the splintering of pop culture, but it almost feels like if you look at charts now, it's like we almost be listening to the same thing because nothing ever changes.
Or there's so many people listening to so many different things that if something finally does bubble up, it stays bubbled up.
Yeah, I think that's true. We have, say a few words for people. One of my favorite columns, well, it's been something, and I couldn't unhear it afterwards, your thing about your chapter about Autotune Zero. Would you, because I'm sure there's a lot of people here who are really they probably hear it and they're like, what is that? And why does everybody sound like a robot now? Can you talk a little about that?
Oh, sure. I love talking about Autotune. Autotune is a fascinating invention because it changed the game completely in ways that were not predictable or predicted at all. So the guy who invented Autotune, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was like this geoengineer like guy. He invented some like form of electronic sonar to detect like pockets of oil under the surface of the earth, and somehow that technology, he got super rich doing that, and then he had people over for dinner and somebody said, you should come up with an invention that will make me sing in tune. And he thought, I can do that. He was like a concert violinist in college or so. I can't remember all the details. It's in the book.
It's in the book. It's in the book.
But so he came up with this thing that it would change the sound of the human voice if it was recorded. It would bend notes that were out of tune and make them in tune. And when he put this program together, almost as like a joke with himself, he included something called the zero setting, where instead of taking your voice and bending the note to make it in tune, he would just dial it directly to be in tune, which makes your voice really choppy and sounds weird and alien and robotic. So the effect is this like this weird vocal distortion that is uncanny and strange, and it kind of sounds like a vocoder or like or a talk box, like these older effects that people would use to give themselves like sci-fi robot voices. Um, but it would do it. It did it in this like different, smoother way, and he just like included it in the software that he sent out, and almost immediately people started abusing it, and the songs that abused it became huge hits. Like the first one that anybody knows about is "Believe" by Cher, where like that thing happens on her voice, and she sounds strange and robotic and alien, and the producers who did that were like, well, let's play this for her and see if she likes it. And she loved it and demanded that it stay in the finished version of the song that came out. And the song became this gigantic, chart crushing global colossus of a hit. And then a few years later, you've got T-Pain, who I wrote about in the book, who basically like built his entire art around what this effect could do to his voice, and became this like almost like a test subject where his preferred distortion became like it became like a lingua franca. Like it's on every pop song now, every like big rap song, like the Future, like the entire careers have been made possible. Not Future the concept, Future the guy, because of what T-Pain decided to do with his voice with this setting. And I love that. It's, you know, people might feel one way or the other, but it's like the common knock on autotune is that it removes talent and grit from the equation. But it's a different kind of talent, and it's producing different kinds of music, and that's what I find interesting about it.
We have a couple more questions. Some is okay. So somebody said they're in awe of your productivity. Can you give us an overview of what your average day looks like and how much time? It's the writing question. So
sure,
like,
yeah, it's. I feel like my answer to this is boring. I take Adderall, you know, that probably helps. Like don't do that unless it's prescribed to you. But yeah, you know, I work at a blog, so I write blog posts in the morning. I write about whatever new songs are coming out, and then right around lunchtime, I'm like, all right, time for me to write a column. I'm gonna get out all the research or whatever, and it's usually stuff that I'm writing about is something that I've been thinking about for at least a few days, and I know the kind of vague outlines of what I'm going to say. So then I just dig deep into whatever the story is and kind of let the telling of it push me from there. And it's I'm a writer who works mostly online and who has worked mostly online for like almost 20 years now, and so it's the constantly cranking stuff out. I think to most people, most writers of my generation, is a sort of natural thing through necessity. So deciding to write a book, and like one of the like writing, not even the book, but the book proposal was like the hardest thing I ever had to do, because like when I don't have a deadline and when I have a blank page staring at me, that was a new thing. Like the thing of the whatever, the trope of the blank page with the cursor just sitting there blinking at me is not something I had ever encountered before, just because the way my job works, it's like go, 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 go. And that's how I've written. And that's how I'm comfortable writing. And I think it's probably helped the column because it's allowed me to get through whatever 900 songs or however many I've written about.
I just want to let folks know that we are giving away 5 $10 gift cards to Lilliput. I'm going to contact you after the show. I'm basically using a formula, and you'll write back. I'm going to write to you. You're going to write to me and tell me if you want it, and it'll be at Lilliput for you. And if you say, I'm going to pass, I live in New York and I don't know how to blah, 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 I will say, good for you. But if you know someone in Milwaukee, you can give it to them. But otherwise, we'll just pass it to the next person. One last thing, I love your editor, Brent Rumble. And I was just curious about the relationship working with him. Did he ask you to make any changes? Did he push you in a certain direction? Was there, like, what kind of collaboration did you have with him? Did the book come perfectly assembled and he was just like, I'm just gonna dot this I?
Brant is the most, I found him to be the most like laid back editor and the most encouraging presence. And it's like, I know that he has shaped the book in like a million different ways that I don't even recognize, but also the big one, the one that like hits me over the head was like, he was like, well, you should write about Fleetwood Mac. And it wasn't on my docket, and I wasn't planning to do it. And when he said that, it was like, oh no, he's right. I absolutely should. Like that, it was a great note, and it unlocked a bunch of different things and let me focus in on a period of music and a form of music and like a development that happened in music that I hadn't really considered previously. And plus, just like the Fleetwood Mac story, like rules. Like it's so interesting and it's so messy. And
So much fighting, so much fighting.
yeah, and it's great. Like what a singular band and what a crazy phenomenon that happened.
I'm a bit of a Fleetwood Mac obsessive. I did notice there's no chapter on yacht rock. I can't imagine why that happened. In any case, we once again love the book so much. It's right now it's available at Boswell, and maybe one day it'll also be available at Lilliput.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm just in case you are thinking that you want to buy it from us and you're like, I don't know how to do that. It is now there, or you can buy it at your favorite book or music store. A friend of mine just sent a photo to me of the book on sale at Rough Trade Records in New York. So I thought that was really cool.
To look there. I was in New York last week.
You could have said, can I sign your copy?
Yeah.
Please visit Lilliput Records also, and we hope to be able to do another program with them. Thank you, Tanner. Thank you, Tom Breihan. We will have this event recorded. Somebody's recording it in another way. We will also have it recorded, and we'll have that up for you for a few days. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We wouldn't have a bookstore or a record store without you, and hope to see you at another one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.